Is the Executive Director of the Arellano Law Foundation, Professor of Arellano University School of Law. He is also the head of Legal Department of Roxaco, a developer of Punta Fuego, former Register of Deeds, Tanawan, Batangas, Deputy Register of Deeds of Lipa City, Batangas City, and Makati City. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud and privileged to give you Attorney Gabriel Dela Peña.
Diwali. Sige. Alright. Alin ang pang? Ito. Sige. Ito na? Mamaya pag ito na. Alright. Ang dami Morning. Okay. Naantok pa ba? Medyo. Okay. So, could you greet the fellow beside you? Good morning. Para naman. Morning. Maganda ang ating simula, right? Sabihin mo, papasa ka ng bar. Very good. Of course. Okay, this should be fun, right? Okay, so before we start off with some formalities, I'd just like to ask a few questions. Do you feel safe with what is happening around us? In spite of killings, nationwide, although they are targeting specific individuals in our society, but nevertheless, is that really the rule of law? Okay? Do we really arrogate upon these people that we have elected into public office the right to take the life of another individual without going through the proper channels? What we have learned in law school as part of our judicial and justice system. When the killings have started, there is no end in view unless the war, or what was proclaimed to be a war against the ills of our society, has been eradicated. But then again, who's going to say that the war has already been won? What would stop these people from turning into monsters, creating this monstrosity around us? That at the end, who would be the losers? Is it the administration? Is it the government? Or is it the people? Some food for thought for everybody, considering that, things that I've been hearing, is that formalin is going to be really a very scarce commodity in the next coming months, diba? When coffins would be reused, all right, because of the killings that's going to happen as we go through the process of cleansing and purging our society of those we consider as not part of us. But if you're really somebody who is into the rule of law, somebody who respects life, is there a better way of treating this matter? Diba? Okay, and with that, I'd like to begin my discussion, this morning on talking about some of the few things that has aroused curiosity not only of our region and this planet, but technically the whole planet. And I begin with the national territory. Alam naman natin what the arbitration has ruled so far. But if we examine closely this ruling, it doesn't talk about whether we own or the Philippines owns these disputed territories of the Spratlys and those located in the southern tip portion of the Philippines. All it did was to rule on the maritime rights, access, exploitation of the natural resources found therein. No specific declaration that we, the sovereign nation, can plant our flag on it. Okay? So by far, what we have as far as that area is concerned is still a claim that needs to be recognized by the entire community of nations. In so doing, it would be tantamount to something like acquisitive prescription. Okay? Now, whether or not that portion of the disputed islands in this West Philippine Sea is part of the Philippines, that will have to remain, still a hypothetical question. In the meantime that we have laid claim on it, we must protect it. It is embedded in our Constitution, as we go through the discussion this morning, that all these territories that we lay claim, all right, under historical title, as you have learned, okay, or by any other means that we have laid claim as it as part of our national territory, we must protect it, okay? So if the President wants to jet ski towards that area and plant the flag of the Philippines, I think it is also our sovereign duty as citizens of this country to help him, all right, assert that right, okay? Karapatan natin yon bilang Pilipino, okay? All right, and with that, the review should be a refresher. Tabag nga ni Dean Sunjang, review, not first view, di ba? So we start off with, again, refreshing our recollection, or rather, refreshing our recall on what constitutes our national territory. Bakit? Because our subject is land, titles, and deeds. We can only talk about matters that are within our jurisdiction, within our nation. If the land is outside the Philippines, the laws that we will be discussing will have no effect at all. Okay? So yung nandito lang sa loob ng Pilipinas. And secondly, it should be above sea. Okay? Hindi pa po pwedeng magpatitulo ng lupa sa ilalim ng dagat. Alright? Wala pa tayong batas on that matter. So if a hypothetical question were asked like, can you title, all right, the submarine areas of the Philippines? Well, I don't know if any government agency will issue a title for that matter, or any geodetic engineer will go down there, all right, and make a survey, right? So yun lang pong nandun sa ibabaw ng lupa. Now, whether that land is there because of nature, or what we call as a divine creation, or whether or not it was placed there by man-made. So long as it is above the sea, our land laws will definitely cover them. Okay? So, look into the screen, ladies and gentlemen, and just try to recall and refresh our minds what comprises the Philippine territory. Our country is an archipelago, meaning to say it is broken down to several islands and islets. Depending who's going to answer it, I think Charlene Gonzalez would have, emphasized on the low tide or high tide, okay? But at any rate, all of this, okay, shall comprise our national territory, beginning with all the islands, take note, and the waters embraced therein, and all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty and jurisdiction, or rather, not and, but or jurisdiction. Why? If we follow the straight baseline method, those that will fall within the straight baseline, well, we will have sovereignty over it. Outside of that, what we call as our exclusive economic zones, then we don't have sovereignty over it anymore, but rather we only have jurisdiction. Jurisdiction to exploit its natural resources. Jurisdiction to co-exploit it, all right, with other entities, so that we may, all right, benefit from the bounty of this area. Okay, so take note again, within the straight baseline method, we will have sovereignty and jurisdiction. Outside of that, we will not have sovereignty anymore, but we will only have utility jurisdiction. Okay, yung paggamit lang yan. All right. Of course, this would further consist of the terrestrial. When we say terrestrial, anything above land and anything that flies and lives above it. The fluvial, all right, and the aerial domains, including the territorial sea, the seabed, the subsoil, the insular shelves, and other submarine areas. As I have spoken a while ago, those falling, beginning with the territorial sea, down to the submarine areas, will form part of our national territory, but however, land laws will not apply to them. Okay, period. And of course, we enclose the area under the last paragraph of this, rather the last sentence of this particular paragraph, or Article 1, using the straight baseline method, wherein all the waters around, connecting, and between the islands of the archipelago will be considered as our internal waters. Very much like your rivers, streams, and lakes even though they would be bounded by the West Philippine Sea on the west side and the Pacific Ocean on the east side, so long as they are within the straight baseline method, they will be considered as our internal waters. Okay? Clear on that one? Okay. Huwag niyong gamitin yung drawing doon sa Pag-asa na pagka may bagyo, yung par. Iba yun. Alright? Magsabihin nung Pag-asa na within the par, di ba, may drawing doon, di ba, may guhit-guhit. No. That's not our straight baseline. Okay? That area has nothing to do with which we exercise full sovereignty and jurisdiction. Yun ay pang bagyo lang yun. Alright? Okay. Alright, let's move on. Okay, then I have been introduced a while ago, and part of the introduction is that this year I have been assigned as the Bar Review Director. Okay, so I'm monitoring yung inyong pace, all right, when it comes to the subject offerings, the professors, and whether or not the topics are covered within the scope of the syllabus as issued by the Supreme Court. Okay? Next weekend, we will take a quick break. Magkakaroon tayo ng barista night. We call it the barista night. Sabi nyo, aga naman, sir. Eh, kailangan tayong mag-relax ng konti. I think you've been studying for how many weeks already, di ba? So maybe a few hours of listening to some people giving us advices, all right, on how to focus further on the bar. Remember, the preparation has just started, okay? The bar is still several months away. If you peak at this point, it's too early, okay? Now, if you pick sometime December, late ka na, November ang bar eh. All right? So it has to be at the last week of October. And with that, we have to bring down yung enthusiasm ninyo to a controllable level so that once we hit October, before the pre-week, all, okay, biometrics would be at its peak. Okay? So pace yourself, and we will do that by lessening the pressure, okay? Giving you chance to relax, okay? Manood kayong sine. Yes, manood kayong sine. All right? And remember, the most important thing, keep practicing the way you answer. Because the bar exam is a written exam. I hope that sunk that into your minds already, okay? It's not just reading it. You have to write it, all right? So your Sundays after Mass should be spent on writing, okay? Practicing your skills in answering. How you shorten it, okay? The words that you're going to use, that should be the key, okay? All right, let's move on. So the 2016 bar coverage as released by the Supreme Court would cover the following in terms of this particular subject. And I'm happy that they have removed the non-essentials as far as land registration, okay? Dati, nandito pa yung Condominium Act. Tinanggal na. Buti naman. Alright? Eh, pang sibilo yan. Hindi naman pang land registration. Although certain provisions of the Condominium Act really pertain to registration of some transactions involving condominiums, but nevertheless, it would be better off to be discussed in another subject. Okay? Alright. Ang nakakapanghinayang na tinanggal dito is the jurisdiction of the HLURB, or the Housing Land Use Regulatory Board. Why? Because that is the primary quasi-judicial body that has jurisdiction to resolve all incidents regarding ownership of real property in the country, inclusive of condominium units. So if there is dispute between the condominium corporation and that of a unit owner, or between unit owners themselves, or between a seller or a broker and a buyer, or a developer for that matter, the primary jurisdiction that would have the authority to resolve all complaints would be the HLURB. Okay? So kung hindi man nakalagay dito, baka lumabas sa ibang subject, just take note of that. Yung away ng broker, away ng developer, or contractor and a developer, etc., HLURB po yan. Okay? All right. So the presentation is rather a bit to me confusing kasi hindi siya in proper sequence, ano? But nevertheless, let's look at this one. It begins with the torrent system. I'm sure you still recall who this fellow is, okay? And then the Regalian Doctrine, then citizenship requirement, original registration, subsequent registration, non-registrable properties, and dealings with unregistered land. Okay, I will not follow the sequence. I-rewrite natin ito para mas methodical yung approach natin sa review. Okay? My attack would be, let's skip with number 1 first. We'll talk about the Constitution. That's 2 and 3. Okay? Then we'll talk about the Torrent system. Okay? And then we'll take a break. Okay ba yon? Para hindi tayo masyadong loaded ng information. Okay? Just the first 3 alone, that's 2, 3, and 1 in that particular order, mahina na mga 2 oras dyan. Okay? And the mind can only absorb so much. And then after the break, we'll be discussing 4, 5, 6, and 7. All right? And then we take lunch. All right? Would that be clear to everybody? Are you comfortable with that one? Or you want it in random order? Bahala na kung ano mauna, etc., etc. Hindi naman siguro na magulo yun. Okay. All right. So ready to begin? Okay. Let's talk about some provisions of the Constitution that has been sources of question. And this is just for review purposes. If you want to write, then go ahead. Okay, but I'm giving my materials to the clear office. I'd prefer na hingin nyo na lang yung printed sa kanila. Ha? If it passes through your eyes, the probability that there will be a recall would be higher as opposed to just writing it down and forget about it later on. Okay? So we begin with Article 6 of the Constitution, Section 28, which to me particularly addresses improvements on lands and how we deal with it. Okay? So these are the exempt properties from form of taxation. Sir, anong kinalaman sa land registration yan? Well, of course, whatever you built on anything should be on the premise that it was the owner who built it. So it is not really the land, but it is whomsoever who built it that was given the exemption. Hindi yung lupa ang binibigyan ng exemption. Yung tao or yung institusyon na naglagay doon sa lupa at nagmamay-ari nung lupa. Okay? Clear? So, if we have a charitable institution here, assuming meron kayong NGO on battered husbands, mga ganon. Okay? So, okay ba yun? Battered husbands? Alright? Pwede naman, wala naman bawal eh. Right? Of course, if they wish to come up with an edifice or a building where they can conduct their rehab sessions, alright, or house these battered husbands, etc., etc., diba? Yung ang sasakit na sa kamay, ng kamay dahil sobrang dami na nilabhan, etc., etc. Okay. If they own that land, okay, fine. The land becomes exempt in itself. If they build something on it, then whatever is built on it is also tax exempt. It is not the land, it is not the building, it is that charitable institution that is being given that privilege. So don't confuse the land with one who is the owner and the one who constructed something on that piece of property. Next, churches. Okay. So kahit anong itsura niyan, it doesn't have to follow, your standard looking church. It could be square, it could be circle, it could be oblong. It's the purpose of that individual who built that thing on that land that makes it exempt. Okay? Parsonages and convents and a pertinent thereto. I'm sure you still recall the case of the Baikar of Cebu City. Okay, nung nagtayo sila ng dormitoryo sa tabi ng simbahan. Question, ano yung dormitoryo? May kinalaman ba yan sa pagsamba sa Panginoon? Alright? Sabi naman ng simbahan, saan naman namin ititira yung aming mga nagpapari? Alright? Alangan naman nandyan sila sa labas. Okay? Hindi naman yata akma yun. Alright? So, if this thing would be considered as an extension of the church by way of being parsonages and convents, then they become part of the improvement, hence becomes exempt in itself. Okay? Mosque, non-profit cemeteries. Yung, meron bang libingan na hindi naniningil na private? Wala di ba? Puro government lang yan. And all lands, buildings, and improvements, take note of the following. Actually, directly, and exclusively used for religious, charitable, or educational purposes. The key should be actually, directly, and exclusively. Remember the case in Tugigaraw. Okay, nung nagkaroon sila ng plantation dun sa loob ng school. Ano nang kinalaman ng plantation dun sa school? agricultural school eh. All right? So of course, they need to teach their students on the practical applications of the theories that they're studying. Hence, it becomes part of the school, which is actually directly and exclusively used for religious or rather educational purposes. Another question there is what happened with the University of the East. Okay? Alam niyo ba yung issue ron? Hindi. Nagkaroon ng mall sa ilalim ng school. Diba? So, nagkaroon na ng mga kainan doon. You know? During my time, it was just a very nice building. You know? A 50s architectural design. And then, in the late 90s, nagkaroon na nga ng kainan. Of course, na-question sila ngayon doon. Ano naman kinalaman niyang mga kainan na yan dyan sa ilalim, and hence they were being charged for the income that they would have generated in that area. Okay, but the decision is that, well, it is still, okay, part of operating a school. You need to feed those who would be inside. Okay? Alangan mang gutumin sila. So that was the position and that particular issue. Okay, let's move on. On Article 12, on national economy and patrimony. Okay, baka lang nakalimutan natin, this is something to do already with our Regalian doctrine. Okay, natatandaan ba natin yon? Bakit walang mga ganun? Regalian doctrine, okay, rings a bell, I'm pretty sure, okay? So here it is enshrined in Section 2 of our Article 12 that all lands of the public domain, okay, anything that would be considered as sources of potential energy, okay, water, potential energy, and just build the dam and then you'll have a hydroelectric power plant there, coal, of course, petroleum, and other mineral oils or all forces that may be considered as potential energy. Meron dito sa Mindanao, yung tinatawag lang heavy water or yung deuterium. Okay? The heavy water or deuterium that was underwent several testings prior to the Second World War by Germany, pero hindi nagkaroon ng definitive conclusion whether or not it is a source of potential energy. But what we have discovered also down there and also somewhere in Palawan is called the compressed gas, yung CNG, which is now being harvested, and we are using it because some buses flying around Metro Manila are already using CNG or compressed natural gas. It is very environment friendly, okay, has almost zero emissions as far as carbon dioxide is concerned, and it's not that cheap, but it's definitely becoming relatively cheap because of the massive resource that we have. In Thailand, isa na yan sa kanilang ine-explore. They're starting to leave LPG behind. Alam niyo LPG, yung mga sinasakyan natin taxi, di ba? They're leaving it behind and trying to find ways and means to use compressed natural gas. And we have lots of it, yung malampaya po. Alright? Napakayaman natin, but we'll get to that in the future, okay? So reality speaks that everything that we have here within our sovereignty is jurisdiction. And the last part, I don't know if it's a pointer. There you go. It's owned by the state under the concept of the Regalian doctrine. Okay? All right. With exception to agricultural lands, all other natural resources shall not be alienable. Okay, period. So, take note. With the exception of agricultural lands. The rest cannot be sold. But what can we do with it? Well, we can exploit it. All right? Harness it so that we can benefit from whatever powers, energy, income that we can derive from it. So I think that's the headache of the new Secretary of Environment and Natural Resources, di ba? Well, I think she's off to a good start. Inaalis niya lang naman yung medyo malpractices being committed against our environment. You know, take note that it is enshrined in our Constitution that we shall protect our environment in accord with the rhythm and harmony of nature. Diba? Okay, so she's there. Okay, maybe she needs some more help from the advocates. Okay, and all other I repeat, all other natural resources cannot be alienated. However, exploitation, development, and utilization may be done under full control and supervision of the state. That means using methodologies, practices that would tend to protect the environment from degradation or eradication, or in some respects, what we call as killing of natural resources within that area without means of resupplying it. Okay? All right. So it is upon the duty of the state to supervise and control these activities. The state in this process may undertake activities and enter into co-production, joint venture. Bakit? This is a capital-intensive endeavor, and of course, our government's resources are not primarily channeled for this purpose. We prioritize education. We prioritize health, di ba? We prioritize military, okay? In that respect, this exploitation of natural resources comes a little lower in the agenda. And that's why we need the private sector in order to ensure that these particular resources can be harnessed to its full potential and our benefit. Take note that the requirement here that if the state would exploit these natural resources in a co-venture or co-partnership agreement is to enter it with a corporation following the grandfather rule. What is the grandfather rule? 60-40. 60% must be Filipino-owned and 40% can be owned by foreigners. Okay? If it's 100% owned, that particular agreement can be struck down as unconstitutional. Okay? Bakit may 60-40? Of course, exploitation should still be limited to Filipino corporations. All right? Now, in terms of such co-production or exploitation of natural resources, the agreement may be valid for a period of not exceeding, at the initial stage, not exceeding 25 years. And then it is renewable for another 25 years. Okay? Under such conditions as may be provided by law. So the total number of years is a maximum of 50. Diba? If we add it, now the question is why? Why only 50? Well, because the corporation code states that the corporation may only survive for 50 years. Diba? So that's why in the event that this corporation will exist more than the 50, you need an enabling law, all right, on the matter. Okay? We'll skip to this one, but take note of what is still covered as part of our natural resources that may be exploited. Okay? Water rights for irrigation is very, very vital. Water supply and fisheries, industrial uses, and other development for water power, the use of which may be limited. Okay? All right. Here is the portion that I am saying a while ago at the start, that we need, that it is constitutionally enshrined, that we need to protect everything that is within our sovereignty and jurisdiction. Kaya si Yasay, si Secretary Yasay, binabakbakan, di ba, sa media ngayon. Because of what he said, it is unpatriotic. Okay, if he can be charged with culpable violation of the Constitution, I'm pretty sure meron na nag-file niyan. Okay? Why? Because it says, the state shall protect the nation's marine wealth in its archipelagic waters. Now, if we claim that these disputed portions of the West Philippine Sea are ours, then it should be protected. All right? Territorial sea, and take note, exclusive economic zones. So if these disputed islets are within our EEZ, then this is the requirement of the Constitution. Reserve its use and enjoyment exclusively to Filipino citizens. So what are we talking about? Sharing it with others if it is ours. Diba? Mali ba yung maging stingy tayo towards this particular item? Right? So it's a judgment call on your part. Are you going to stand past assuming there will be a hypothetical question on the matter? Will you agree with a sharing with other countries with regards to the exploitation of this natural resource? I would say no, and my legal basis would be the Constitution so provides that if these areas are within our territorial sea and exclusive economic zones, the use and enjoyment should be reserved exclusively to Filipino citizens. Period. Okay? Ganun lang kaikli. Alright? Huwag nyo nang ilitanya kung ano pa yung mga pwedeng idagdag doon. Okay? Alright. However, Congress may, by law, allow utilization of natural resources by Filipino citizens. Ito yung mga small scales natin so that we can give due, okay, income and labor to our countrymen. Okay, let's move on. Next, still on Article 12, Section 3, also part of the Regalian Doctrine. We have enunciated in our Constitution the 4 types of land in the Philippines. 4 na lang. Okay? And the classification of lands of the public domain are as follows. Agricultural, which a while ago we said is the only one that can be alienated. Next is forest or timber, mineral lands, and national parks. Okay? Of course, the country is still being proclaimed worldwide as an agricultural country. We have not yet achieved that level of being declared as an industrial country. Hindi pa tayo umabot sa ganun. Okay? Now, of course, when we talk about agricultural, that means plant anything. If it grows there, then it's agri. Now, inclusive of fish pens. Okay? Yung palaisdaan. Whether you're putting fish or even shrimp farms. Agri na ang classification nun. Okay? Or yung meron kayong bangusan, or yung mga tilapia. Okay? Alright. Next would be forest or timber. Of course, when you say forest, you have trees there. Okay? Now, what if there are no more trees? Can it still be considered as forest? It will still be forest land. Okay? A declaration that it is forest land will not be abdicated just because of the fact that there are no more trees in the area. Okay? That reclassification doesn't happen because of the absence of the trees in that area. It needs a congressional act. Okay? Next, mineral lands. So, same hypothetical question. What if all the minerals have been exhausted in the area? Namina na. Will it change the character of the land? Again, no. Okay, you need a congressional act to convert it for another purpose or use. And finally, national parks. Okay? Of course, we cannot sell the national park. It is not part of our national economy. It is part of our national patrimony. Okay? It is here where we showcase our culture, our heritage. Imagine if they will sell Luneta. Di ba? I-relocate natin si Rizal. Uy, saan ba namatay si Rizal? Di ba doon? Di dapat doon natin siya bigyan ng pagpupugay. Right? So, yan, baka mamaya itanong na naman yung photo bomber doon sa may puntod ni Rizal. You remember that DMCI condominium is supposed to be, an eyesore. If you take a picture of the monument of Rizal, it sticks out at the back as, a building there that looks ultra-modern, and you have Jose Rizal in his monument there na parang hindi bagay, right? Now, that is still a sub judice matter. Okay? But to me, if there is such a restriction as to constructing edifice that would block, all right, the natural view of such area, if there is a law on that matter or a city ordinance, then that building has to go. Okay? That's the rule of law. However, if there is no law or an exemption was given to such company, then I believe they should stay. All right? It's a question of which would you prefer. Okay? In other countries, there are national monuments surrounded by buildings that you cannot even see that the monument is there. Nobody's complaining. Okay? Pero tayo dito, meron lang ganun. Pangit lang daw sa picture. Nag-selfie lang yata. Napikon na. Eto na, nagkaroon na ng national discussion on the matter. Okay? If there is such a law limiting, okay, buildings to be constructed within that area to a certain height, then we have to follow the law. Okay. Now, question. Assuming that all of this has been, except for national parks, okay, Assuming that all the forest and timber and mineral has been exhausted, what happens next? It is incumbent upon the President to recommend to Congress to pass a law that will reconvert this property from forest or timber or mineral to agricultural lands. Okay? Remember the case of Krivenko versus Register of Deeds of the City of Manila. A very, very old case nung nag-LTD pa kayo. Natatandaan nyo pa? Hindi na diniscuss ng professor ninyo. Hindi na sagian ba yon? Okay. Anyway, just to refresh us, in Krivenko, this was prior to the declaration of the sub-uses of our property. Remember that it was decided using the 1935 Constitution, and we didn't have agricultural, forest, mineral, or national parks back then. Wala yan sa 1935 Constitution. Question there is whether or not the property that Krivenko was owning at that time, nung meron pa tayong parity agreement, all right, when he sold it, how would you consider the land? Sabi niya, hindi, agree. Paano naging agree yan? Meron ng building yan. Okay, so yun ang pinagdidebatihan nila. Sabi ni Krivenko, kung tanggalin ko yung building, magtanim ako dyan, tsaka may tumubo dyan, di ba, agree yan? Ayan, namimiloso po yung tao. Which eventually, it was upheld. Tama nga naman. Okay, tama nga naman. Agree is for the purpose of planting something, growing something out of the land, and, right, taking benefit from its produce. Now, whether or not that land was primarily dedicated for a specific purpose, it doesn't stop the government from reclassifying it for other purposes. Okay? So, assuming you have an industrial park, a 500 hectares sprawling, all right, industrial park, after which the industrial park has no more use. Nag-aalisan na yung mga locators doon. O sabi ng gobyerno, sige, take over na ulit namin yan. What are they going to do with it? They can have it rented, or they can remove all improvements from the land and redeclare the property or convert the property back to agricultural. And then, make it now alienable and disposable. But these things can only happen upon the recommendation of the President to Congress, where Congress will now come up with an enacting or an enabling law that will reconvert the land to agricultural and eventually alienable and disposable. Without such act, the land remains, okay, as such classification in its original or altered condition. Okay? So, never mind kung wala ng puno, forest pa rin yan. Never mind kung wala ng mineral, mineral pa rin yan. Okay? Agricultural lands of the public domain may be classified by law according to uses to which they may be devoted. Yes, we have a law already. The subclassification of agricultural lands are divided into 3 types: residential, commercial, and industrial. Okay? There can be a mixed use in all sectors of our country, in all local governments. Pwedeng paghalu-haluin yan, but there are certain limitations. Example, for industrial, it cannot be more than 30% of the land mass of the local government unit. No more than 30%. Otherwise, the entire municipality can become an industrial zone. Okay? So, hindi po pwede. Why? Because we cannot stop people from migrating, and we have to give them the space where they can live. All right? So yung majority still is residential, and yung remaining commercial. Pwedeng mix residential commercial, it's all right. Okay? And finally, alienable lands of the public domain, as I have said, shall be limited to agricultural lands. Okay? All right. For private corporations, may they hold such alienable lands of the public domain. Hold, take note of the term hold, not in the concept of an owner, but in the concept of a possessor and user of the property. Remember the definition of possession, di ba, in Civil Code. It is the holding of the thing and the enjoyment thereof without necessarily claiming ownership of the property. We cannot give alienable lands of the public domain to private corporations. We can only allow them, as per our Constitution, a lease. Okay? Pwede lang silang mangupahan. Okay? if you recall the case of Chavez versus Peña and Amari, okay? The lease cannot be more than 25 years, okay, at the initial, and then renewable again for another 25 years, provided that the area shall not exceed 1,000 hectares. All right? Gaano kalaki yung 1,000 hectares? Dalawang golf courses yan. Okay? Ganun kalaki. A good size of a golf course is about 500 hectares. Kasama na yung kanyang clubhouse, kasama na yung mga nursery areas where they can have those grass, nurtured and then replanted, etc., etc. So, dalawang golf courses. Okay? All right. And then, citizens of the Philippines may lease not more than 500 hectares. Or, they may acquire. Take note of the term used, acquire. So, pwede tayong magmay-ari ng alienable and disposable lands of the public domain. The limit would be not to exceed 12 hectares. Maximum 12 hectares. Okay? But there is a query here. Paano na lang yung sinasabi ng Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Law natin, where there is a maximum of 5 hectares. Okay? So, merong gray area between these two. Of course, if we look at it from the rule of law, can any law be higher than the Constitution? Diba? Okay, there is no case on the matter. There is no specific study being done. Okay? But in case of a hypothetical question on this, I'd stick with the Constitution anytime. Okay? And be firm on your position. Maximum of 12 hectares. And the acquisition can be done by any of the following means. You can purchase it. Pwedeng bilhin. And excluded in the bar, but what you get is what you call the sales patent. Okay? Pag bumili ka ng lupa from the government, they'll give you a sales patent. Hindi ka nila bibigyan ng ordinary TCT. Okay? Or they may give it to you directly by way of a homestead grant, which is you've been there for quite some time, you've been tilling it, and then, okay, you're being freed from the bondage of the soil. Okay? Again, a patent. Or they can give you a free patent, yung grant naman. Okay? Kasi matagal ka na rin doon sa area ngayon, birthday ni President, usually pag birthday ng Presidente, namimigay ng lupa ang gobyerno, baka maambunan ka. In both homestead and a grant, there is no consideration. Libre po yan. But when you talk about purchase, of course, there is payment involved. Okay? All right? So I'll just go and read through this one. Taking into account the requirements of conservation of ecology and development subject to requirements of agrarian reform, it is incumbent upon Congress to pass a law to determine the size of the public domain which may be acquired, developed, held, or leased. Okay? Well, we have this law already. It is the comprehensive land use law of the country. Walang masyadong nakakaalam eh. Okay? And it should have undergone a major revision during the time of just recently acquitted President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, your president, di ba? Oh, ba't kayo nagre-react? Kayo naman, no? Presidente naman talaga ng Pilipinas yan eh, okay? It should have undergone a major revision. Unfortunately, tinulugan ng Congress yun. So with this Congress, we hope that we can see a better comprehensive land use program, okay, that will earmark the entire nation, point us towards development, maintain our ecology at the same time, and make sure that the Filipino citizens would be benefited from all of this. Okay? You can examine that law. Meron namang sa Library of Congress. Okay? Okay. Next on the list would be the citizenship requirement. So tapos na tayo doon sa constitutional aspect, okay? So ito naman tayo sa citizenship requirement. Well, isa lang naman ang requirement. If you're not a Filipino, period, you cannot own land in the Philippines. Okay? So medyo ano tayo dyan? Selfish. Bakit? Ang lit-lit ng Pilipinas eh. Di ba? You could just imagine if we open this one to foreigners, ay goodbye Filipinos, di ba? Malamang puro ang tinitira natin dito, mga tigte 35 square meters na condominium na lang. And they would have the 1,000 to 5,000 square meter lots all over the Philippines, and that's it, right? So I can understand the mindset of our forefathers why we have this kind of limitation. Okay? And I agree with it. And I agree with it. If we allow foreigners, then they should be limited merely to residential lots. Okay? Not to exceed 500 square meters. Hanggang dun lang. Okay, citizenship requirement. Does that statement that only Filipinos can own real property in the Philippines absolute? Well, the Constitution says no. There are exceptions. Beginning with Section 7 of the same article, Article 12 pa rin tayo. First exception, hereditary succession. Okay? Now, when it speaks of hereditary succession, it doesn't pinpoint whether the heir is a Filipino or a foreigner. Okay? It doesn't speak of such scenario. Okay? No private land shall be transferred or conveyed except to individuals, corporations, or associations qualified to acquire or hold lands of the public domain. Okay? So when we speak of hereditary succession, what kind of succession are we talking about? There are two modes in our country, di ba? Testacy and intestacy. Okay. The Supreme Court, in the case of Ramirez versus Viuda de Ramirez, has prohibited the testacy aspect or testacy mode of inheriting land, okay, by a foreigner from a Filipino. Bakit? Okay, dapat intestate lang daw, sabi ng Supreme Court. Of course, if it is through a will, what would prevent the foreigner from making the will happen? Diba? Nakuha niyo yung danger that is attributed to such kind of a mode. So the foreigner will make it appear that she loves the Filipino, but in truth, there's already a plan to kill the Filipino because there is already a will bequeathing the entire property to the foreigner. Honey, take your milk. Diba? And the cookies that comes with it, it's laced with cyanide for all you know. And there you go. Diba? This ban, this prohibition by the Constitution has been effectively circumvented. Okay? All right. However, if it is intestacy, I submit that there is no limitation. So, well, that is prevalent in the country at this point, diba? Yung interracial relationship, right? Tama? Yes, we have Filipinos marrying, Japanese, Americans, and Europeans, diba? Cross-border relationship na tayo. It's alright. Wala namang masama na. Love has no boundary, diba? Tama ba yun? Tama? Mukhang wala kayong interest, no? Okay. But anyway, it has its complications. Alright? So yung mga Facebook, what you call it, anong tawag doon? Status. Yan. In a relationship. Di ba yung mga ganun? But complicated. Alright. Of course, it has because if you enter into such kind of relationships, then you're bound to acquire something. Correct? Part of, loving another is to secure that other person. Put something above the person's head. Di ba? Shelter. Ay, bibili ka. Wala kang magagawa. Kailangan mo maghanap ng matitirhan. Right? Well, if you're talking of a condominium, it doesn't matter because there is an exception to that one. Foreigners can own condominium, even in their personal capacity, so long as the condominium corporation will not violate the grandfather rule, yung 60/40. Okay? But for real property, inalienable lands of the public domain, there is that limitation. Okay? So the problem here is that if the foreigner marries a Filipino, we know that the land cannot be titled in the name of the foreigner. Period. Absolute yung rule. Okay? And if that foreigner gets to own that property in the future, then it can only be through intestate succession, not through testacy. Period. Okay? Case in point is Frenzel versus Catito. Okay? Frenzel, of course, alam naman na, well, one point to consider here is that it's usually the foreigners that, funds the acquisition of the property. Okay? hindi naman sa I'm demeaning to the Filipinos, but about 80% of them, ang bumibili talaga niyan yung foreigner. Okay? So, at case of Frenzel versus Catito, okay, landmark na yun. Catito is an OFW. Okay? But she was in a relationship already. And Frenzel, a foreigner, was also in a relationship. And they had a relationship. So, very complicated na, right? And they fell in love with each other and promised each other that they will clear their past so that they can be together forever. So, may forever. Okay? Before clearing up their past, they started to live together and started to acquire real properties. Where? In the Philippines, kasi Pilipinas si Catito. Okay? Bili sila ng bahay, bili sila ng kondo, tayo ng mga negosyo, etc., etc. No? And after a few years, it appears that Catito was not interested in clearing up her past. So si Frenzel, the foreigner, decided to call it quits. Wala ka namang ginagawa eh. Ako nagpa-divorce na, ikaw wala pa. Ayan. So she was having, the best of both worlds. So the guy decided to walk out. And with that, dinemand niya na ngayon na, alright, okay, let's split these properties and give me what is due to me. Ayan. So, he tried to get back the properties that he said he was the one who financed in purchasing the properties. Okay? True enough, hindi naman kino-contest ni Catito. Siya naman talaga may pera eh. Alright? But there was opposition because it says that you cannot own those lands. Period. Okay? So, paano na ngayon? Sabi ni Frenzel, anong gagawin ko? So, his lawyer said, alright, let's look at this doctrine called in pari delicto. Because under this particular doctrine, if the act itself, or if the act is not illegal per se, then what has been lost can be recovered. Yan. Yun ang argument nila. So sabi ng nakarating sa Supreme Court, yun lang naman ang issue, no? Whether or not that doctrine will apply. Sabi ng Supreme Court, teka, where did this particular transaction emanated from? It's a sale, rather it's a purchase of real property to which, okay, this person is now claiming as his, when in fact, under our laws, it cannot be to him. Precisely, the Constitution prohibits him. The act itself is illegal per se. That's the reason why he had the properties titled in the name of Catito, because from the very beginning, Frenzel knew he can never own this land. Therefore, it is illegal per se. Okay? Ending, umiyak si Frenzel. Wala siyang nakuha kahit 5. Okay? But then again, dura lex, sed lex. Next exemption. Section 8 of the same article. Notwithstanding the provisions that I've just recently discussed, natural-born citizens of the Philippines who has lost their Philippine citizenship may be a transferee. I underline that portion. Okay? Transferee lang of private land subject to limitations provided by law. Okay? So, former Filipino citizens can be transferees. So, kung may mga kamag-anak kayo sa abroad na they have already acquired, the citizenship of the country where they are right now, and you can ask them to come back, and then you can tell them, all right, you can buy properties here in the Philippines. Buy. Be a transferee. Okay? That's the limitation. They cannot own it under the concept of acquisitive prescription. Bakit? They have to reside here for 10 or 30 years. Hindi po pwede. Mababiolate naman yung primary law natin on the matter. Therefore, they can only buy. Okay? Buy properties is all right. Well, this provision was initiated under the Omnibus Investment Code of the Philippines. Doon ang galing yan eh. Hoping that, when the other part of the world was, financially gaining, all right? And this side of the planet is on the losing side. Remember, noong mga 80s, to the early 90s, di ba? The Philippines was, and the entire Asia-Pacific region was really going down. But the rest of the world is going up. So ito ngayon yung pang-attract sa kanila. Balik kayo rito. Alright? We'll give you a chance to own real properties again, but on the condition that you were a former, natural-born Filipino citizen. Okay? You can buy any property anywhere in the country. Okay? So that states yung citizenship requirement. General rule, if he's not a Filipino, period, you cannot own any real property. Okay? First exception, Section 7, only by way of hereditary succession. Third exemption, Section 8, if you are a former natural-born Filipino citizen. Other than these two exemptions, there are none to be found in our laws. Okay? All right. Let's move to the first one is the two constitutional provisions. Now I want to bring back the first one, the torrent system of land registration. After this, we will be taking a break. Okay? All right. Am I talking too fast? Am I covering too much ground here? Na-absorb ba natin? Tell me if, raise your hand if I'm talking too fast. Okay? Minsan kasi emotionally charged ako and, there's that tendency to talk too fast. Okay? Next, the torrent system of land registration. By way of recall, the Torrens is a, who is he? Sir Richard Robert Torrens. Okay, he's British by birth. Okay, and he's a customs officer, and he was assigned to Australia. Okay, under the maritime authority of the then United Kingdom. When Australia is still part of protectorate pa naman ng UK ang Australia. Okay. So the question here is, how could a maritime officer conceive of an idea with regards to a land registration system? Well, what he did was just to pattern it after the Maritime Act of the United Kingdom, thinking that, if you have a bill of lading that can identify a specific cargo, and that cargo can be transported from one country to another, and then upon reaching that particular destination, it could be peddled or sold, to other people interested in the cargo without the cargo necessarily leaving the warehouse. And that was a good idea. Yun ang sabi niya, di ba? Let's look at it from this example. Assuming you have about 500 tons of coffee beans exported to Australia, okay? And then, pagdating mo dun sa, ikaw ang consignee, pagdating nung 500 tons of coffee beans, you're going to sell it, correct? Now, what's the best way of selling it? Well, you peddle it, di ba? Doon sa mga interesado. Well, you can just imagine, you're, lugging around 500 tons of coffee, Diyos ko, lahat ng madaanan mo, bumili ka naman para gumaan itong dala-dala ko, di ba? Parang ganun ang mangyari, no? But if you have the bill of lading, then the cargo stays in the warehouse, and all you have to peddle now would be the piece of paper that says you have 500 tons of coffee beans in this particular warehouse, correct? And then present it to somebody who's interested. How much do you want? Well, I need about 100 tons. All right, 100 tons for you, period. Okay, that's it. Sign here, blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's move on to the next, right? Makes things easier. In the same manner that he conceived the land registration system that we are following right now. Antiquated as it is, but we are still using it. So the concept that the land stays there, and that if you need to do something with the land, then you have a piece of paper that you can present to anybody and say, well, I have a piece of property somewhere in the country. Okay? Makes things easy, di ba? Right. So that was his idea. And when he went back to the United Kingdom, he became a member of the House of the Lords, parang parliament nila. He now proposed that particular system of land registration, which eventually the world came to know as the torrent system of land registration. Okay? All right. I will not go through the intricacies of that one kasi hindi na naman covered nung bar syllabus natin. But rather, I will focus on the three guiding principles of the torrent system. Okay? He founded this under three major concepts that would make land registration relatively easy. Okay? Starts it with the mirror principle. Okay? In a while, I'll be using the board. Okay? I hope na, would the light there be sufficient dun sa technician? Okay ba yan, Fred? Makikita naman? Okay. All right. So it starts with the mirror principle. Okay. If you can read through me here, if it's legible to everybody or may mga screens naman kayo dyan, means that the title, take note, the title to the property will reflect completely and accurately all the current facts of the title so that it is free of any adverse claim. Actually, it's not of the title, but of the land. Okay? Adverse claims or burdens unless they are mentioned. So if it's not affecting the property, then it should not be found on the title, period. Okay? Hello. Work something like this. All right. This is the land. This is the title. This would be your mirror. Okay? Anything that happens here should be found here. If it's not here, it should not be here. Period. Okay? The problem is, if you don't know this, then you're only seeing this portion. Correct? Right? And the problem is, how would you know that something is affecting on the land unless you can actually see it? Correct? So if somebody built a house here, oh, you can see it. Oh, may nagtayo ng bahay, di ba? If somebody constructed a fence here, oh, may nagbakod. Di ba? Nakikita ninyo. But what if the thing that affects the land is not visible to the eye? Okay? What do you need now in order to see the invisible reflected to the mirror? It's called a legal mind. Only you, those with legal minds, will be able to see that the land is subject to a mortgage. Di ba? But pag pumunta ka sa lupa, malalaman bang naka-mortgage yun? Uy, may mortgage. Nasaan? Di ba? But if you have that legal mind, you will now be able to convert the invisible to a visible just by merely looking at the title. All right. So, yun yung kanyang first concept. In other words, sabi niya, the title should show to the world all of the relevant information about ownership and claims or warnings, okay, mga caveats about the property that an interested party will want to know. Okay, so if it's not there on the land, it should not be there on the title. Okay? Believe me, only a person with a legal mind will be able to see the invisible. The next of his principle, all right, sige, ito na, my own discussion on the matter. So generally speaking, a title will show the current owner, ito yung relevant facts that you will get to see on the title, the current owner, and all outstanding registered interest. Okay, if there's a mortgage there, if it's a lease there, okay, or maybe somebody gave an SPA, the owner gave an SPA to somebody to sell it for him or mortgage it for him, okay. All outstanding registered interest on the land, such as, here we go, mortgages, caveats, easements, and builder's lien. The mere principle, however, is not absolute. There can be certain public rights or burdens that affect the title, such as the right to expropriation or zoning restrictions that may not be shown on the title. Otherwise, lahat ng titulong i-issue ng gobyerno, ang kapal niyan. Di ba? Saan damakmak yung restrictions na nakalagay? Right? Your property can be the subject of expropriation. Yeah, we know that. Your property can be the subject of police power. Yes, we know that. Di ba? And we cannot exempt the property from the effects of these laws because they are constitutionally enshrined, period. So why burden the property when it's already there? And why burden the owner with such a very thick title when things like this does not stop the government anyway? All right? So later on, we'll be discussing what are these provisions that affects real property, invisible to the eye, is not found on the title, yet definitely the owner is burdened with it. Okay? Oh, by the way, dito sa zoning kasi sa Philippines, may wala tayong limitation, ano? If you own a piece of property, everything above it and below it, iyo yan. Except if it reaches the commercial air zone, which is 30,000 feet above sea level yun. So, everything sa tapat mo, ng bahay mo, iyo. Galing, ano? And anything underneath it, hanggang abutin si Satanas, technically, iyo. Alright? But in other countries, there are limitations as far as ownership of real property. Why? Example, yung mga public easements nila, no? Yung dinadaanan ng cistern, yung sewer system, yung kuryente. In other countries, you don't see lamppost, di ba? Merong mga, di ba? Ang daming wire, di ba? Mamaya, nandun na si Spider-Man, naglilipad-lipat doon, di ba? Ganun. So, walang mga ganun because it passes underneath. Okay? And with that, may certain depth lang that you own, anything underneath it belongs to the state. Okay? So, minsan may mabibili kang bahay abroad, biglang mamaya, ba't may maingay doon sa ilalim? Meron palang subway doon. Alright? Because that's not yours anymore. Pero dito sa Pilipinas, absolute yun. Hanggang abutin mo yung gitna ng mundo. Alright. Next is called the curtain principle. Okay, I'll read through this one. Principle means that the current certificate of title contains all the information about the land. It's not necessary for an interested person, such a potential buyer, to worry about any past dealings with the land because only the current one is the material one. This does away with the need to search back through the history of a piece of property to be sure that the owner has a good title. You could just imagine if, nobody's going to respect that title. So what happens with it? Anybody who's interested will not just say, all right, I'll take this piece of property and whatever title comes with it in good faith. Parating may doubt, and that destroys the essence of the torrent system. If anybody who wants to deal with real property would have to go through and dig back to history until such time that they will arrive at the mother title, wala nang magkaka-interest bumili ng lupa. Tatama rin na yan. And then you'll always ask your broker, kumusta yung title search mo rito? Alright? Are you convinced? Because if you're not, forget it. Diba? Masyadong burdensome. Okay? The problem, wala tayong, we have a eraser. Saan? Yun. Okay. So it says the curtain principle. What comes to mind when you hear the word curtain? Wala? Wala, doesn't ring a bell. Curtain. Cover. Diba? Something, okay. To hide something. Right? I'd call it temporary. When I hear the word curtain, it's merely temporary. Because you don't put a curtain on a wall. Diba? Kalokohan yun. Ba't mo lalagyan ng kurtina yung pader? Diba? Except for decoration purposes. But normally, you'd put a curtain by the window. Diba? So that you're going to hide something temporarily, whether it's inside or outside. You don't want to see it or you don't want to be seen. But in the event you want to see something at the other side, all you have to do would be to lift the curtain. Diba? Pave it. That's it. Okay. So the curtain principle actually works same. Alright? Tingnan natin, ha? Under the curtain principle, what is necessary is just to look into the current one. Everything that is needed to be understood with regards to the property, ownership, size, etc., okay? And all the caveats should already be here. If it's not here, then it's not affecting the land. However, under the curtain principle, it doesn't mean that we can rely on this one. It also admits of certain exemptions, and we will discuss them later. In the meantime, let's just focus on the principle. So sabi niya, the current one would be sufficient. No need to look at the past. However, if the owner decides or the interested person wants to look at the past, then the curtain can be lifted. The current one should show number 4. Yung pinanggalingan niya. If you're still unsatisfied, lift 4, and then you'll be able to see 3. And then until you reach back the mother title, what we call the OCT. Okay? All right. Following this principle of the curtain principle, one outstanding doctrine that's been used by the Supreme Court is called the good root title. That means, yung bunga, pwede mong ibalik dun sa ugat niya. Yung pinag-ugatan niya. Alright? Because if a title will come in somewhere here, and that it is not capable of connecting back, alright, to its predecessor, then it will violate the doctrine of the good root title. Okay? I have a funny feeling. Baka itanong sa bar exam. Okay? It's not enough that you have a title. It must be that the title can be traced back. Please use the term pag lumabas sa bar exam. Can be traced back to its origin. Otherwise, any person will just brandish a title and say, well, hey, excuse me, may titulo ko. Well, it doesn't work that way. Even if you have it, but you cannot connect, shall we say, to the family tree. All right? Then, your title can be struck down as suspicious. Okay? That is the curtain principle. Now, in other forms of land registration, there goes the burden if they don't have such kind of a principle applicable to them. You really have to go through a search, a title search, as we call it. You know? In the Philippines, they call it due diligence. Okay? And the question here is, it's all right if the property has been recently titled. What if the property has been here, has been titled since time immemorial? Assuming that the land was brought into the system when it was first introduced in the country in 1932. And after that, how many transactions have been, have undergone with regards to the same property? Well, could you just imagine the volume of information that you have to dig through just so you can arrive at a conclusion that it is safe to acquire that property? Well, following the curtain principle, all you need to look at would be number 5 or the latest one. The torrent system, not the title systems, it may be necessary to search back again through all the past titles to be sure of the validity of the present title. This system avoids this. It is possible, however, to ask for a historical search if you want to know who owned the property in the past. Curtain principle, a mere temporary cover to allow you to look into the past and history of the land. Okay? Last is the insurance principle, and I'm very much surprised that they excluded this in the bar exams this year. Okay, first time na nakita kong excluded siya. Okay, let's look at the insurance principle. What comes to mind when you hear the word insurance? Huh? Gastos. Right? Well, you have to pay for the premium, right? A risk. Correct? Insurable interest, tama? You cannot take an insurance against something that you don't have an insurable interest, correct? All right. So how does that affect land? Okay. To sell the idea, sabi ni Mr. Torrance, if I need to sell this idea, then I need to sell it because of the fact that, the entire concept is not just for a certain area or a certain municipality. It has to be nationwide. It would be useless if only half of the country would be covered by my system and the other half not. Everybody would be moving to one sector and then the other would say, forget it, wala naman kami security dyan sa other side na yan eh. Correct? So as to sell the idea to everybody, if your property will be brought into the system, okay, well and good. But if your property was excluded by the system because of the procedures that were applied, then you need to be compensated for the loss that you will suffer. Mawawalan ka ng lupa because of the system eh. Yun ang magiging effect. The primary effect of bringing land into the system is the probability that some people may lose their property in the process. Hence, those who will lose it must be duly compensated, applying the insurance principle. But this one, take note, will only apply if the following conditions are met. The idea behind the torrent system is that the registry must guarantee the accuracy of every title. Okay? If as a result of human error, there is a mistake about the title to a piece of land, and someone suffers a loss as a result, they will be compensated by a fund. A fund which we call in this country as the assurance fund. Okay? But unfortunately, striking as it is, excluded siya sa bar. Alright? But this is the third leg of the principle behind the existence of the torrent system. And we have cases in the country. Ang dami. Diyos ko. Did you know that every time you bring a piece of property into the torrent system, you contribute, okay, a certain cost into the assurance fund? This fund, since its inception, we may be talking of billions of pesos already. All right? But nobody has accounted for it at this point. I have never read any report from the LRA that says we already have X amount in the assurance fund. All right? Well, I'm not raising any suspicion. Baka sabihin nyo naman, ang intriga pa ako rito or whatever. But that's based on my research, okay? Oh, sorry. All right, we have that case of spouses Gonzales versus National Treasurer. All right, the spouses are overseas workers, newly married, looking forward to the future, and has some extra money. So they decided to invest that hard-earned money. They spoke to a broker, a friend of theirs who was also working with them, a co-worker in another part of the world, and said, all right, we'll leave you with an SPA, and could you please see through the acquisition of this particular property? Okay. So, kinausap nila yung developer, sabi ng developer, all right, fine, your credit stands good, and you can now start to pay the property through amortization. So, they course the payment to their friend. Unfortunately, okay, the friend is not a friend. Oh, hindi pala siya BFF. Okay? Ang ginagawa niya, hinuhulog naman talaga niya yung monthly amortizations. But the problem is that at the end of the transaction, the property was titled to her. Okay? Hindi dun sa mag-asawa. Okay? And then, worst, ang ginawa nung friend, okay, isinanla yung property sa ibang tao. Of course, there was really no intention of paying for the amortizations for the loan. The property was foreclosed. And then that's it. Unknown to the spouses abroad of what happened, when they returned, they started to inquire, oh, ano nangyari na? Kumusta na yung ano namin? Looking forward to a house where they can, build a home, etc., etc., only to find out their investment gone. Of course, they cannot stand it, so what they did was to file the necessary action in court. All right? All actions failed. Desperate as they are, they filed an action against the assurance fund, believing that they lost the property because of a human mistake or error, and that they should be compensated for such loss. That is the main issue brought to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, regrets, but the fund was never established for such purpose. The fund will only compensate for losses that occurred at the initial stage when the property is being brought into the system for the first time, or what we call original registration. All subsequent registrations will no longer be covered by the assurance fund. Any fraud committed cannot be pinpointed to the government anymore but rather some individual with a bad intent would be the reason why the fraudulent transaction occurred. So finally, the Supreme Court said, no against the assurance fund. However, you can file the necessary action against your friend. Okay? And that's as far as it would go. Okay? All right. Well, it's about 9:30. You want to take a break? Want to move on to the next topic? Break na? I'd like to have a consensus here. I don't want to decide on my own. Means, parang interesadong dito na lang kayo eh. Ano ba? Lalabas pa tayo for a while. You want a break? Okay, how many minutes do you want? So I can, again, prepare for the next set of materials. 15? Alright. Pwede naman forever kung ano. Joke lang. Alright. Sige, I'll give you 15. It's 9:37 on my watch. Alright. Okay, so that should be 47. Alright. So mga 9:50. That'll be fine. Alright. See you in a while. Thank you.